All right. Everybody in here? Looking good. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give it just a moment for people are still trickling in. Thank you all for coming. You know what? You guys showed up on time, so we're gonna run this thing on time. So on behalf of Peninsula Temple Beth here in San Mateo, California, welcome. My name is Andy Garlikov. My wife Julie and I have been members of the congregation for the past 9 years, and we have 2 kids, Ben and Becca, both of whom are hopefully watching their father this evening. Hi, guys. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the back end, but you can put any questions in chat at any time, and we'll get to them throughout. I want to say first hello to my fellow PTBE members. You know, the temple hosts so many great events, and I'm glad you found your way to this one. And for those of you, and I see a whole bunch on the list here that are joining us from elsewhere, we are so glad you're here. After the event, if you're interested in learning more about our synagogue, you can visit us on the web at www.ptbe.org. Well, unlike guest chaplains in Congress, I'm allowed to make opening remarks before getting to the main event. So first, I'd like to thank the temple staff, especially Tara Mann and our executive director, Kate Lazar, who's hanging around in the background here helping out tonight, for helping me organize this. Also a shout out to the Reading Bug in San Carlos for stocking Howard's book to support the event. If you haven't picked up a copy yet, here's what it looks like. And tonight's discussion inspires you. You can get it there or really anywhere fine literature is sold. Howard Mortman is the author of When Rabbis Bless Congress, the Great American Story of Jewish Prayers on Capitol Hill. He is also communication director for C-SPAN, the public service providing TV coverage of the US Congress. A veteran of Washington, D.C. media, he's observed Congress from positions at MSNBC, National Journal's Hotline, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and New Media Strategies. Howard and his wife, Beth, are raising 2 daughters, both of whom, as it happens, are headed to big milestones in the fall. One will be starting college at the University of Virginia, and the other will be becoming a bat mitzvah. Did I mention Howard's book is for sale? We should put some links in the chat or something. Anyway, this is Howard's first book event in California, and I'm going to say Howard long overdue because his Bay Area roots run deep. His wife Beth has family in the area, and he and Beth actually just got engaged down the 92 in Half Moon Bay. It's a good story. You should ask him sometime. I actually met Howard while working on Bob Dole's presidential campaign back in 1996, when he was at a publication called The Hotline. Now, for those of you who follow politics today, The Hotline was, I'll call it the precursor to Politico, except there really wasn't much of an internet then. So it was published once a day. It came early in the morning, and it arrived by fax. And let me tell you, at the campaign, we lived and died by those 17 messily faxed pages every morning. It brings back memories to see you, Howard. I'm delighted to welcome you to PTBE for the next hour.
Thank you, Andy. This is incredible, and I so appreciate you doing this and the synagogue. I'm going to throw you a curveball from the very beginning, and I'm going to tell you something that you don't know that I only learned about 2 days ago, that I have actually been to Peninsula Temple Beth twice in my life, and I've been in person there for the bat mitzvah of my niece and the bar mitzvah of my nephew through my wife's side 12 years ago or so. So 12 and 8 years ago. So I've been to the synagogue before, and I didn't know this till a day or so ago. So it's great to be back again here with Peninsula Temple Beth. So I appreciate that. So.
Well, that's more than some new members can say who have not been in person for the last 14 months. So you're like an honorary member already. All right, well, that's a nice surprise. So let me jump right in. We're a curious bunch, and I'm sure we'll get lots of questions from the audience over the next hour. And I'll keep an eye on the chat for that, but I'm gonna start with one. So when I first read in the fall that you'd written this book, I couldn't help but wonder how it came about. You know, where'd you get the idea, and what did it take to turn that germ of an idea, you know, into this?
Yeah, so it's a great question because it's kind of it really is an offbeat, bizarre, topic that no one's ever thought about. So two things. First of all, just like in a very macro side, I've always wanted to write a book. So like, this is a dream to be able to do this, just in concept. But this particular piece of history came about, and thank you for mentioning C-SPAN at the very beginning, where I work. As you said, we are a network that covers Congress. As a result of covering Congress, the floor of the House of Representatives and the floor of Senate, I watch a lot of Congress on TV. It's my job to watch Congress. And, I've been there since 2009. And just by virtue of watching it, and just you see a lot of, obviously anger, and you see debate, and you see people fighting each other. But the one thing that always intrigued me was the very first thing that Congress does every day, and that's pray. And every session of the House and every session of the Senate opens with a prayer. That always intrigued me, just as on an intellectual level. It looks like nothing else that happens during the day. There's a chaplain, and they open with a prayer, even before they have the Pledge of Allegiance. It's the very first thing. And, Andy, I love what you said at the beginning. You have some remarks, unlike the chaplains are the first thing that happens every day. So just as a concept, I was intrigued by that. And we're going to go into this, but every so often, the official chaplain of the House and the official chaplain of the Senate is not there to do his or her duties. And a guest chaplain fills in, kind of like a guest host, like Joan Rivers filling in for Johnny Carson back in the day, and they give a guest prayer. So that's interesting. That would intrigue me too, just on an intellectual level. Now, that happened on rare occasions. Even rarer are the times that a rabbi was a guest chaplain. And that's kind of where this story begins. So just watching it on TV, watching these prayers happen, and a couple times a year, a rabbi would be there. I would just like jot it down and just be intrigued. Well, just it kind of grew on me that I really wanted to find out all, being Jewish, I wanted to find out all the rabbis who ever prayed in Congress and create a database of them, and out of a database write a book. So that's the origin story of this. What's really neat about this is both exhilarating and frightening, and that's creating an alley of history. No one's ever done a book on rabbis in Congress before. No one's ever written about prayer in Congress before. So it's a really, for me, a totally fascinating, and not even a Jewish story, but it's a congressional story. If you're a lover of congressional history, this is a new alley. It's a pure passion project. I can assure you that whatever you, through your kindness of involving me in the reading bug and all that, I'll sell more copies here than I ever intended to sell by doing this. This is not the most, it's not a Tom Clancy level topic here, but it's a piece of history, and I love it. And I just love uncovering all these little nuggets that we'll share this evening.
It's quite a journey there. I mean, I'm sure it was a whole lot of work to put this together, 600 and some different blessings to look at. And I can imagine that my colleagues in tech out here can start thinking about the database. But the first thing, when I was in DC, the first thing that I know everyone would do when a new contemporary political book came out was they'd go to the index and they'd say, oh, am I in here? Is someone I know in here? So I admit I did that, not for myself, but I looked up, okay, what rabbis do I know? So I go through, and I actually found out that the rabbi who was the head rabbi at our synagogue in Phoenix, Temple Beth Israel, Rabbi Albert Plotkin, he actually led a prayer in the House in 1978. Now, he didn't mention it ever that I recall, and he did mention during my bar mitzvah a few years later how much he enjoyed doing that. So I can only think that maybe that was more impactful to him than the House thing, but we can let other folks decide that. I'm just curious how this rabbi out in Phoenix ended up in front of the House of Representatives giving a prayer. Like how do folks get to become a guest chaplain in Congress?
Yeah, it's a great story, and it's like everything else in this tale, it's one of the great unknowns. How do you physically get from point A to point B, point A being California, Arizona, or anywhere else in the country, and end up in the literal, figurative center of democracy? The short answer is, Andy, it's for most of the guest chaplains that we are going to be discussing, most of the rabbis, in general, are sponsored by a local representative, congressman or woman, or senator. I would say the vast 2/3 of them, let's say, or 3/4, have a local connection. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that they're donors, and it doesn't mean they're giving money to be there, but it means that these are prominent members of the community, and for whom the congressman or congresswoman has a connection to, a personal or spiritual connection to. I will say this flat out, and there's. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a trained academician. I'm not a trained Jew. I'm not a professional Jew. I flunked out of religious school. So everything I'm learning here, I'm sharing, but there is a part of being a rabbi, and this is not a bad thing. It's going to sound bad. That's a huge PR part of this. There's ambition. And it's not a bad thing because you're selling the Torah, you're selling your congregation, you're selling the community. So for a lot of these rabbis who appear in front of Congress, they have close personal relationships with their member of Congress, but they're also pushing themselves. They want to be, this is a huge honor, to be called, as it were, to the Torah, called, as it were, to the rostrum, and give a prayer in Congress. So no one shies away from this. So when a member of Congress invites a clergy person to appear, they do. They pay their own way. They fly out to Washington. They bring the family. They fill the gallery with their family members, and they take pictures afterwards. And local media writes about it, and it's a big thing. So everybody's a winner. The member of Congress puts the rabbi in social media, tweets about it, puts on Facebook. The rabbi, his or herself, is not shy about sharing the news. So everybody's a winner, and out of it comes another rabbinical prayer in Congress.
So for us, the short answer would be get to know Jackie Spear. I guess we should tell our clergy if they want to do this. Very good. All right. So, as Johnny Carson used to say, I understand you brought a clip or maybe a few of them with a little bit of other information wrapped around it. So why don't you go ahead and share your screen, and you are sharing your screen already, and set that up for us. So if you, for those of you watching, you can adjust, you can pull your little bar to the right and make Howard and me smaller and make the presentation a little bigger. All right, take it away, Howard.
Great, thank you. And just one bit of caution, everybody. Normally, my 12-year-old daughter does this for me because her dad, even though her dad is the director of communications for a TV network, is very inept when it comes to doing this. I'm flying solo tonight. My daughter is upstairs doing her homework. And by the way, I'm in the basement right now of our home. We're in Northern Virginia, the DC suburbs. Our family belongs to Temple Road of Shalom, which is a Reform synagogue in the Northern Virginia area. So a little bit of background from where I am. So right now I'm showing you the presentation. This is going to be heavy on video. It's roughly about 20-25 minutes. I'm going to run you through some rabbis giving prayers and history, and then we'll come out of this and we'll talk about it. I'll probably pause during some of the video if I'm running late. I'll probably skip over a couple of slides. I just want to let people know what's happening. So with God as my witness, I'm pressing forward here, and hopefully, all right, here is, I'm going to set the scene. This is nothing to do with being Jewish, nothing to do with the rabbi. This is a typical day in the US Senate. Here's March 5th, 2021. Here's the first thing that happened that day. Oh, and the first thing that happened that day was this.
Pray. Eternal God, who rules the raging of the sea, use our lawmakers to bring stability to our nation through wise and knowledgeable leadership. Remind them to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Give them the wisdom to understand that moral rot within a nation can topple its government. Lord, inspire our senators to pursue justice, to love mercy, and to work with humility. Help them also to remember that you rescue the blameless from harm. And Lord, give a special blessing to your faithful servants who worked through the night. We pray in your faithful name. Amen.
Okay, a really quick note of what you just saw. Chaplain Barry Black, a retired Navy admiral. Barry Black is a Seventh-day Adventist. Barry Black is the official chaplain of the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate has, and he is a taxpayer-paid position. He has staff. The equivalent of Barry Black on the House side, her name is Margaret Kibben. Margaret Kibben is brand new. She is a Presbyterian. Also, oddly enough, right now, a retired admiral in the Navy. So you have two you have one male African-American and one female white, which is very unusual, first time ever, who are chaplains of the House and the Senate. You heard Barry Black's prayer here. You heard a little bit, if you're fans of Micah, the prophet, you heard a little bit, Micah 6:8, walk humbly with your God. That's what he often invokes Jewish Hebrew scripture into the prayer. So that's your scene setter. That's what you typically see. Now let's move our story forward, or backwards, actually, I should say. A quick history of prayer in Congress. This tradition goes from the very beginning. The very first thing Congress did was open with a prayer. Even before the Congress, the Continental Congress of 1774, they opened with a prayer, and the Senate elected their chaplain 1789, and the House elected their chaplain in 1789 as well. And you see the last thing there, Bill of Rights, all this occurred, prayer and chaplains in the US Senate and the US House occurred even before the Bill of Rights was ratified. So this is the very first thing they did. So this goes back to the very beginning. Guest chaplains, which we were talking about tonight, began in the 1850s. This was the first time someone filled in, a substitute chaplain filled in. And the first rabbi guest chaplain was in 1860, 10 years after the tradition began. The very first guest chaplain, a bit of history here, Morris Raphael was his name, born in Sweden, came to America, New York City, at B'nai Jeshurun congregation in New York City, gave the first prayer from a rabbi in Congress. This was, Andy, I won't put you on the spot, but do you know who the president was in February 1860?
Is it James Garfield?
Close. James is correct. Buchanan.
Buchanan. Do you have a video clip of the rabbi from 1860, by the way? Could you show us that next?
Before Lincoln. So this was the eve of the Civil War. You can imagine what it was like to be in Congress then. And he talks about brethren dwelling together in unity, the specter of the Civil War hanging over Congress. So the first rabbi prays, quite a surprise to many people, having a Jew, and the New York Times was shocked. They said he appeared as full canonicals in their phrasing. Morris Raphael, it's funny, you asked earlier, Andy, about how do you become a rabbi in Congress or guest chaplain. He was kind of a celebrity rabbi at the time. He was unashamed of, he didn't have the shame gene in him, and he went around and spoke a lot of places. So it kind of fit in his time. Morris Raphael would be the first. By the way, let me just go back a second. It just so happens Morris Raphael was the first rabbi in Congress in the House. 10 years later, actually on day from tomorrow, May 20th, 1870, if you like, on these dates, the first rabbi in the Senate was there. So a little bit of history there. All right, so that was Morris Raphael. Let's do a little video of a more current guest chaplain, and I'll display and talk out of this.
House Speaker Thomas Foley of Washington will gavel in today's session of the House.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Arthur Leylandveld, Fairmont Temple, Beechwood, Ohio.
O thou whom we address as did our fathers, calling thee Ribono Shel Olam, Lord of the universe, our focus of ultimate value and demand, we ask again the question framed by the prophet 2,700 years ago. What is it, Lord, that thou dost require of us? Micah's ventured assurance was only to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk with restraint before thee. And if this is what is required of all, how much more is demanded of the elected representatives of our nation? Caught as they are by the stresses of political division, public pressure, and legislative conflict, and yet expected to be exemplars of those moral ideals to which our country has always pledged loyalty. In the scriptural history which we associate with thy name, we learn that this dilemma has ancient precedents. Jethro, the Midianite father-in-law of Moses, warned his son-in-law, the great lawgiver himself, that he would wear himself out were he to continue to handle the responsibilities of leadership alone. Hear me, said Jethro. Surround yourself with advisors and aides who are trustworthy, God-fearing, persons of truth who hate corruption. Grant us, Lord, a portion of Jethro's wisdom, that we may shape our public life to reflect that truth and probity to which we have always aspired, that we may fill these sacred halls with a profound concern for social welfare, that we may become models of true patriotic commitment for our children, our successor generations, and that we may set a standard for the nations of the world as we continue to struggle to conquer homelessness, hunger, and lawlessness for the fulfillment of our American vision, a vision of brotherhood.
Okay, 1 second. Let me go backward. Sorry about that. Okay, so a lot wrapped up in that. Quick words on the as we leave the slide. A couple things, Rabbi Lelyfeld. Some may recognize the last name. He was legendary in the 60s, marching with Blacks in Selma and fighting for social justice. His son, if you recognize the name for media junkies, his son Joseph Lelyfeld was the executive editor of the New York Times for a while. On spiritually, he talked in, we opened with Barry Black invoking Micah. You heard the same words from Rabbi Lelyfeld here, invoking Micah, invoking Jethro and Moses, and just bringing a lot of Jewish themes into this. A lengthy prayer, by the way. This was about 3 minutes. Prayers these days aren't as long. I just like it a lot. It's filled with just a lot of good, meaty kind of examples of rabbi prayers. I'm going to go to the next slide and show you, just to bring home a little bit, California prayer. Rabbi Michael Lotker, Temple Laramie in Camarillo, California, 2014.
The house will be in order. The prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Michael Lotker, Temple Laramie, Camarillo, California.
Dear God, you sustain us and inspire us. Yours is the unity connecting all things created by you and directing us to serve you in unity of purpose, spirit, and strength. Bless us with the resources to do your work. The very name of this nation, the United States, and the very name of this institution, the Congress, underlines the power and indeed the holiness of such unity. I therefore humbly request your most ancient blessing for the people of this great nation and for their elected representatives. May God bless you and protect you. May God's light shine upon you, and may God be gracious to you. May God's face be lifted before you, and may God grant you peace. And we say together, Amen.
So he ends with the priestly benediction from Numbers, the countenance over the congregation, as it were. I like it a lot. Just it's really interesting. By the way, Andy, I'm going to bring you in. Who's presiding over the chamber at the moment? He's an author, by the way.
We were talking about this earlier because I just read Speaker Boehner's new book. So yeah, we've seen like selection of former politicians in these clips.
That's right. And by the way, did Speaker Boehner in the book that you just read, did he talk about introducing Rabbi Lotker to the house?
There's a whole chapter on it, Howard. Whole chapter. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Andy. Let's move on to some number. All right, let's run some numbers here. How many times have rabbis prayed in Congress? 634 times rabbis opened Congress in prayer. We saw Rabbi Morris Raphael, February 1860 through October 2020. And that's 441 rabbis. Why is the number different? Why is it 634 times rabbis prayed and 441 rabbis? Because about 100 rabbis have given 2 or more prayers, multiple appearances by a rabbi. That's why the difference in the numbers there. On average is about 7 and 8 times a rabbi prays in Congress every year. Going back to World War II, I mean, there are some years there's a lot, some years there's less. But that's kind of the average going over time. Top synagogues, everybody likes to know who's up and who's down. Washington Hebrew congregation, by virtue of geography, has had a rabbi pray in Congress 24 times. B'nai Jeshurun, where Rabbi Raphael, our first rabbi, was from 8 times. And Addis Israel, a very political congregation in DC, not that they're politically active, but famous political celebrities such as Ruth Bader Ginsburg belong to Addis Israel. I will mention Washington Hebrew Congregation 24. They partnered with me in writing the book, and it makes sense because they've had the most number of rabbis. I mentioned Addis Israel. Here's a prayer from a Rabbi Solomon Metz. This is taken from the Congressional Record of June 5th, 1944. Andy, I'm going to call on you one more time here, then I will promise not to bother you.
Fire away.
All right, so if this prayer was given by a Rabbi Metz of Addis Israel, gave this prayer on June 5th, 1944, what happened the next day in American history?
Well, that would be D-Day, Howard.
That's correct, Andy. Boom. And so, well done. You can
Redeem myself from the Garfield thing. There you go.
Right. So he talks in his prayer about peace and decisive victory. And again, it's one of these things where the sweep of history. What was it like to be in the chamber, in the Senate? And even though it was a secret, you knew things were happening, and just the sense of war coming in, and the rabbis giving the prayer. It's absolutely amazing, the history of that. Most prayers by rabbi guest chaplains. We're going to talk more about him in a second. Rabbi Arnold Resnikoff has given 17 prayers in Congress. Evenly split between one more in the Senate and the House. He's a retired Navy chaplain. Moshe Feller, number 2, Lubavitcher rabbi from Minnesota. Rabbi Arthur Schneier, a Holocaust survivor in New York, is in 3rd, and Rabbi Joseph Haberman, Washington Hebrew Congregation, 4th place, roughly about 8 prayers, I believe. But Rabbi Resnikoff, who's still very active in giving prayers, retired, and we'll talk about him more in a second. Well, I'm talking about now. He's a retired Navy chaplain, fought in Vietnam, fought in the Mekong Delta as a soldier, became a chaplain. We actually gave the prayer at the invocation of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial here in Washington, and was actually also in Beirut in 1983 when the barracks were bombed. So he's seen a lot of contemporary military history, but he ranks number 1. People want to know, who's in Judaism. We like to say which denomination is up or down, and Orthodox, Reform, Conservative here, roughly equal. 35% Orthodox, 34% of the rabbis are Reform, 30% are Conservative. For Orthodox, I do put Lubavitcher rabbis in that category. I think roughly about 14 or so Lubavitcher rabbis have prayed in Congress. People do want to know, I've had the question, Reconstructionist rabbis. 4 Reconstructionist rabbis have prayed in Congress. I don't put them in any category, but I do want to give a shout out to the 4 Reconstructionist rabbis who have prayed in Congress. Oh, and actually, one point is important to make. No one said, there's no dictate, there's no mandate that X rabbi has to be a conservative, Orthodox, Reform. This happens organically that they're chosen. It's kind of a neat little feature here that then this is the natural breakdown is roughly equal between denominations.
Hey, just curious, Howard, of the overall, all of the guest chaplains, what percentage of those, it was a question from the audience, from someone I sort of know, my wife, what percentage of all guest chaplain blessings were given by rabbis?
Oh, Is it okay for me to say that's a great question and not really answer that? It is a great question. So numerically, let's say there's 300 prayers a year, roughly. If you just look at days, Congresses in session, House and the Senate, roughly 300. So, you know, if you do the math, 7 or 8 times a year on average, you know, are rabbis. So Andy, you're the numbers guy, you're the stats guy, whatever that number equals.
2%-ish, I'm gonna go with. 2.5%?
Is how much is it?
Say 2 or 2.5%. Am I, someone can check my math on that.
Yeah, yep, roughly, yeah.
Okay.
So, not a huge number per year, an anomaly definitely, but enough rabbis have done the prayers to make an interesting story. But it's definitely a great question. I'll come prepared next time. I'm with you with the actual answer there.
I was close. Kate checked my math there. 2.6%. How about that?
All right, here's my chance to work in California. Into the slide here. Top states, New York. I'm sorry it's not on the slide, but 184 prayers from 136 different rabbis. Second place, Pennsylvania, 45 prayers from 38 rabbis. California, strong ranking here, 29 prayers from 22 rabbis. Pretty good. Has long way to fly. Had tough to get out to DC. So good for California for being in the game. So those are the top states.
Now, and I asked you in advance, you know, if any folks from the peninsula had done this. You said there had not been, but as I read through the book, I saw a couple references to Temple Emmanuel, other folks in San Francisco. So we haven't gotten on the board just yet, but we'll work on that down here. We'll try to, you know.
So Andy, it's amazing you say that because I did a bit of research, believe it or not, leading up to tonight's presentation, new original. And I didn't know this last time we talked. I didn't even know this for the book, but tomorrow is an on this date, May 20th, 1978. And I have written down here because it's brand new for me. Rabbi Malcolm Cohen of Temple B'nai Israel in Daly City, California.
Oh.
Is that close?
Just a little north of the 101. Yeah.
So it's part of the count. So pretty close now. He is the only, and forgive me for people who know this far better than I do, the only Karaite rabbi, which is a very small branch of Judaism that believes in the literal, in the defining that the Torah is, there's no Talmud for them to interpret. The Torah is all. The only Karaite rabbi to ever pray in Congress from Daly City, California. May 20th, 1978, Rabbi Malcolm Cohen of Temple B'nai Israel. So strong California presence there, strong California game from the rabbis. First woman rabbi, Sally Priesand, October 23, 1973. Some of you who know Jewish history may have heard of her. She was also the first woman rabbi ordained in America, ordained the year before. She gave the prayer, October 23, 1973. Andy, I won't stump you here, but she was, don't worry, she was sponsored by a famous New York female, very big in liberal, liberal. Go, Andy, go ahead. Who sponsored Rabbi Sally Priesand? Go ahead.
Bella Abzug.
Abzug, best sponsor, you're absolutely right. Bella Abzug sponsored her. Now, in Rabbi Priesand's prayer, which is here, no mention of her being the first woman, but in Bella Abzug's sponsoring remarks, lots of talk about the pioneering of it, of her being the first prayer. So, and by the way, just want to point out one anomaly here. The congressional record got her name wrong, misspelled it. You see, they spelled it incorrectly, P-R-E-I-S-A-N-D. It's correctly spelled P-R-I-E-S-C-A-N-D. So it's tough to find the first woman rabbi's prayer because congressional record, the government misspelled it. How many female rabbis? 15 prayers by 14 women. The bottom right, Rabbi Hannah Spiro has the only woman who's done a repeat performance, has prayed twice. A Reconstructionist rabbi from here in DC. I'm going to play just a little bit, only because I'm running, as always, I run short on time. But let me just play a little bit of a female rabbi. And
today's prayer will be offered by a guest chaplain, Rabbi Dina A. Feingold of Beth Hillel Temple, Kenosha, Wisconsin, who is also the sister of the junior senator from Wisconsin.
Let us pray. Source of wisdom, well of justice, fountain of goodness and of peace, we praise you for pouring your spirit upon humanity. As we struggle feebly to fashion our society, into the kind of world you have envisioned. We cherish your guidance as we strive to bring peace, harmony, and equity to this world in which we are your partners. As these elected officials begin another day of deliberation in the United States Senate, we pray that your presence may dwell among them. Enable them to discern and to acquire but a minute portion of your wisdom and compassion, your knowledge of what is just and right.
All right, Andy, I'm going to pause it only for time, in the interest of time, not to give short shrift to a Congresswoman, Rabbi Feingold. But I am going to quiz you now, Andy. Unmute yourself. Who was Rabbi Feingold introduced by up there?
That would be the junior senator from Wisconsin, Russ Feingold.
There you go. And I would have accepted Senator Feingold as well, but you're right, or her brother. But you're absolutely right. Russ Feingold introduced her, his sister, Rabbi Dina Feingold, April 1994. Moving on, I love talking about this military rabbi. So there's rabbis with a guest chaplain. There's also a strong Jewish tradition of rabbis in the military, of military chaplains. Here are four of them. And these four, you'll see, they all wore their military uniforms to pray, representing all the branches. Rabbi Stephen Ryan of the Air Force, top left. That's Rabbi Kenneth Lewand, the Army chaplain. In the bottom, you have two Navy chaplains, Morris Capro, and on the bottom right is Rabbi Harold Robinson from Annapolis. It was a Naval Academy admiral. So strong military presence and veterans presence, soldiers of rabbi guest chaplains. I'll go through quickly the slides. So many of the rabbis are born in America. Many are immigrants. Strength and it's a great story of immigration. Poland, Germany, Austria. Poland ranks number one. Story the strength of Jewish surviving of the Holocaust, of people who came to America to escape the Holocaust by the Poland and the Germany numbers here. And they became rabbis and ended up praying in Congress. It's like the ultimate great victory over Hitler to have rabbis who are from these countries come and pray in Congress. Holocaust survivors themselves. Here are examples of four rabbis who survived the camps. Believe it or not, 6 Auschwitz survivors became rabbis and prayed and became guest chaplains who survived Auschwitz. It's an amazing story. The bottom right is Rabbi Laszlo Berkowitz. This is from his prayer in June of 1988 on Flag Day. He was rescued by the 82nd Airborne in Auschwitz. Rabbi Berkowitz died, unfortunately, a couple months ago. He was my rabbi at Temple Road of Shalom in Washington, but loved America, gave tribute, sponsored by Congressman Frank Wolf back in '88. But again, these are all Holocaust survivors and Auschwitz survivors here from the Congressional Record. A quick note of rules. People want to know, well, what can they talk about? Prayers should be not exceeding 150 words, exclusively in English language, which is kind of a new rule. Free from references of Day of observations in other nations. These are Senate rules. That's the House. Here's some Senate rules from 1979. Same kind of exclusively in its entirety English language. This was given to me, by the way, from a rabbi, Jeffrey Stiffman, who gave the prayer in '78. So this was his letter of invite from the chaplain then. Rabbi talked about the content a little bit. They've covered the range of war and peace, the environment, the space program, faith and dreams, American institutions, love of America, the Liberty Bell, space at the time of the space program, the space shuttle and the astronauts. And Gordon Cooper has been mentioned in the rabbi prayer, but civil rights movement in Vietnam. It covers the range of history. They invoke prophets. Isaiah has been invoked 70 times by rabbis praying in Congress. The famous Isaiah 2:4, nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, 45 times for Isaiah. This was amazing for me just to go through old congressional records and find in them Hebrew. So here's 4 examples of Hebrew being reprinted in the congressional record here. These are all from the 60s. These are all rabbi prayers. This is fun for numeric people, love numbers, 66 times. rabbis have prayed in both the House and the Senate. 14 times rabbis have prayed in the House and the Senate on the same day. In 1987, you see that's one of them. That's tomorrow, May 20th, 1987. Am I the only person that Zoom is fascinated by this? I just love this. So all right, I'll just move on. I'll geek out of these numbers later time on my own time. I'm going to skip this for now because I'm going to go to
2019
what
winds
Andy
down.
has been talking about. I'm going to skip over this for time. Here you go. Here, Andy. This is for you, my friend. Let's do this. The only setup I'll give here, a rabbi guest chaplain is sponsored, as we talked at the very beginning, by members of Congress. And that member or a senator gives remarks about the rabbi they've sponsored or introduced at the beginning by the speaker. So I'm just going to let this run. It's self-explanatory. Here you go for you, Andy.
Will be in order. And today's opening prayer will be a guest of Senator Mark Warner. It will be offered by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Israel Zoberman, founding rabbi of Congregation Beth Shavram in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
The prayer will be offered by a guest chaplain, the Rabbi Wayne Dossett, the Elijah Menyon, La Costa, California.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, the Rabbi Richard Baruch Rabinowitz, Aish International, New York, New York. The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, the Rabbi Thomas A. Lockheim, Congregation Or Kadash, Tucson, Arizona.
It will be offered by the guest chaplain, Reverend Erwin N. Goldenberg, Temple Beth Israel, York, Pennsylvania.
A prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Stephen Roth, a Congregation Eitz Kahim, Passaic, New Jersey. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Michael Siegel, Anshe Emet Synagogue, Chicago, Illinois.
Today's prayer will be offered by a guest chaplain, Rabbi Shimshon Sherrill, Congregation Keho Zik Ron Mordecai, Brooklyn, New York.
Prayer will be offered by guest chaplain, Rabbi Moshe Feller, Lubavitch House, St. Paul, Minnesota.
Today's prayer will be offered by guest chaplain, Rabbi Mel Heck, Temple Beth Ann, Las Vegas, Nevada, a guest of Senator Harry Reid.
As Rabbi Harlech mentioned in his invocation, today is significant. It's significant because it's the day of the Shabbat community, important the day in the Shabbat community. It's the 15th anniversary of the passing of Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, one of the great Jewish leaders of our time.
Rabbi Feller has been a leader in the Twin Cities Jewish community for over 30 years. Accompanying the rabbi today were 20 students from the Habab Academy located in St. Paul, Minnesota,
and completed postgraduate Judaic studies at the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Brooklyn, New York. Since 1988, Rabbi Green has served as the Lubavitcher Rebbe emissary to Rochester.
Madam Speaker, I want to talk about Rabbi Hyman, who just gave the opening prayer. There is a midrash, one of the many parables that embellish upon the Torah. In this particular midrash, there is a man from the land of Israel, a businessman who was in another country.
I would say that in addition to his spiritual guidance, he introduced me to Cholent, which for this Presbyterian was a new experience. I think I thank him for introducing me to that part of his history and culture, if not exactly for the culinary experience. Welcome, Rabbi Wiederhorn, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
All right. With that, Andy, I'm going to stop screen. I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to throw it back.
Okay. That was fantastic, Howard. I'm hoping we might have a doctor of some sort in the audience who could tell us how to treat a mid-rash. That was, put a little cream on it. Sarah or Karen are on the line here. Anyway, cool. Well, listen, folks, I see a couple questions. I will ask those, but I'm going to take prerogative and just ask a couple more quick ones before I go to the audience questions. Actually, I have one primer. You covered that one. Never mind. So here's first one. In the book, and I read it cover to cover, folks. It's really good. You shared snippets of the media coverage we saw some, on the screen there, that the rabbi prayers received over the course of the years. I thought it was kind of a fascinating window into the perception of Judaism in America, especially through the 20th century. I'm just curious, when you dug out all these press clips, was there anything particularly surprising to you in what you read?
You know what? The surprise is reflecting of the surprise of the media, meaning that in the early days, when a Jew is in Congress, the media didn't know what to do with it. Like, well, what do you do with this? And they're trying to describe. I mean, it's so much of this is us looking backwards in time, and we're in the moment here, and like any words they could have used to describe Jews is probably wrong. But you almost have to say, well, that's just who knew, who has the sensibilities back then that we do now. So a lot of the descriptions don't really age well of how they describe Jews and what they look like and the head coverings and all the really weird descriptions. So that surprised me, just seeing how we Jews, how the rabbis were described in the media back in the days. Now nobody cares. I mean, the appearance of a rabbi in Congress doesn't merit attention by even national Jewish media. So, it's the shock of it is what's really interesting. But now, if there's anybody who is interested, it's the local media, and it's a great local boy or girl makes good by going to Washington to pray in Congress. So it's a more straightforward story now, but it's less of a shocker than it used to be.
All right. So got a question here from Francis asking how far back you could get videos or audio. Like how many years back were you able to get archival footage?
Francis, not only am I happy that you're here and it's great to see you, I love that question because I actually have an answer for that. So I will mention, to answer the question, I have to mention one quick thing about where I work, C-SPAN. C-SPAN began in 1979. That's when the U.S. House went on TV for the first time. So when you're watching Congress on C-SPAN, you're watching their cameras, you're watching the House of Representatives showing Congress. So there's no video of anything before 79. The Senate went on TV in 1986. So any video of rabbis in the Senate starts that era moving on. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I have video from then. The earliest where I do actually have archive video in 1985. I have Rabbi Joshua Haberman being introduced by Tip O'Neill. It's actually pretty, I have a whole YouTube channel devoted to rabbi prayers. Everyone I can find I have roughly about 220 rabbis for whom I can find video on a YouTube playlist. And I also have I also have another YouTube playlist of their sponsors. Their early sponsors, Congressman Ben Gilman, who sponsored Rabbi Haberman in 85. So the short answer to your great question, for whom there's video, goes back to 85. That said, the congressional record is now online and searchable, so you can find mentions of these rabbis going back to the first one, back to 1860. But the video itself begins in the mid 80s, and everything since then is now available online.
What about pictures?
Well, that's a wonderful question. Because some rabbis posed for pictures at the rostrum. It's like staged pictures. So there's a great picture of Leo Beck, a famous rabbi in 1948, gave the prayer, and there's a picture of him at the rostrum that looks posed because they weren't in a session at the time with the chaplain. There are also pictures, personal pictures of rabbis and their families taken on the steps of the Capitol outside, such as like in the 60s. I've had rabbi families send me their pictures, personal pictures of the occasion. So there are some still pictures before the video, not maybe a handful, and then there's some personal memento kind of pictures for that. And there's also one of the earliest rabbis, Rabbi Abraham de Sola, for whom they created one of these lithographs, one of these like drawings of him giving the prayer. It's kind of cool to see and all that. So that goes back even further than that. Francis, thank you for the question. I love that.
So it's interesting you mentioned Leo Beck because my my wife's family in Southern California actually attends a synagogue that's named for him. So I did not know who he was until I read your book, actually. Question from my friend Andrea in Tucson. You mentioned actually her rabbi, you didn't, one of the other folks introduced her rabbi there. How do members of Congress tend to react to the prayers? You know, do you see, I mean, you've maybe been seen a little closer from where you sit. Anything interesting in there in terms of reaction for particularly dynamic or controversial blessings?
Well, that's really interesting you asked that, because these prayers happen at the very beginning of sessions. Typically, there's not a full crowd there. You know, they're still trickling in. So it's a small, to use the phrase, congregation is a small crowd. But on days of big history that's happening, there's, a lot of people and there's reaction. Some of these prayers can be controversial if people want to make a controversy out of them. For instance, the first when a Muslim prayed was controversial. Rabbi prayers, for the most part, have not been. There's been no controversy around them. They haven't really said anything. They, for the most part, tend to not get involved in policy. You can't get involved in advocating legislation. You're not there to tell members of Congress how to vote. You know, your messaging is to God, basically. It's to connect the audience to God, to the Almighty. So for the most part, the prayers themselves are not controversial, but, you know, sometimes if there's a very, a lot of the rabbis have mentioned immigration, and, because it's such a part of the Jewish experience. And it just happens at a time when there's big immigration legislation from the House or the Senate. So it can be connected.
Okay, thanks. Question from Michael Batat here in the local area. You mentioned the rules about the English only. Michael's curious if there was anything when that happened, and there's anything that was the impetus for that rule change.
Michael, thank you for asking that. I didn't get a chance to show, and it's okay, but one of my favorite prayers, I skipped over it. A Rabbi Maurice Lyons from St. Louis gave the prayer in the Senate in 1994. And Rabbi Lyons, who has since died, he raised his hands over the Senate like a congregation and gave the Shekhinah, which is the priestly benediction that you find in Numbers, and he did it in Hebrew. And it's amazing. So many of these prayers have been given in Hebrew. The rules against a foreign language are there now. I don't know when those were instituted, but you don't hear it now. You might hear it slip in every so often, but I think there's a lot more Hebrew back, before they instituted this rule. I don't know why there's a rule that you can't speak a foreign language. It seems like it would apply only to Jews, but but who am I to outguess the rules? But it is a rule now. You're right. You can't speak a foreign language.
So we just have a few more minutes. I'm going to put you on the spot with a couple. I got a little lightning round here for you, Howard. You ready? Okay. And you pass if you don't have the answer. We're not going to waste any time. Youngest rabbi to bless Congress.
Oh, golly. It was actually one of the earliest rabbis, and I'm blanking on that rabbi's name. If I could fumble, there are rabbis who are still alive that gave prayers a long time ago. I mentioned Rabbi Arthur Schneier. I think his first prayer was 1958. I think he was in his late 20s, still alive, Parkey Synagogue in New York City, Holocaust survivor. So rabbis, I don't know who the youngest one was. I know a lot of rabbis. I mentioned, I'll fumble here, I'm Rabbi Hannah Spiro, a woman rabbi, Reconstructionist, two prayers she's given. I think she's in her 20s right now, very young. So no, it's, and Rabbi Prezan, I mentioned a year after she became a rabbi, was in Congress praying. So in the 20s, okay. The youngest one.
All right. How about oldest?
So here's, I actually, it's a great question. I'm going to be sad for a second. And I'm going to bring you down with a great question. And I didn't show the video, but 91-year-old Rabbi Romy Cohen gave the house prayer last year. Rabbi Cohen, when 91 years old, was not only in the Holocaust, he fought as the youngest partisan, fled to Hungary, fought in the forests of Hungary, killed, not only to fight the Nazis, he killed dozens of Nazis and survived, came to America, became a rabbi, and prayed in Congress last year. Gave the prayer in the House last January on the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. So Rabbi Cohen was the youngest partisan called fighting Nazis, became, I believe, the oldest rabbi to ever pray in Congress. Now the story turns really sad. A month later, Rabbi Cohen, who survived the Holocaust, died of COVID. And so this is in March of last year. So one of the earliest famous rabbis to die of the disease. So survived the Holocaust, but couldn't survive the coronavirus. But 91 years old, I think he was the oldest at that age.
Okay, I don't want to end on that, so I'm going to ask you one last question before we close here. You've done a lot of events all over, all over on this book tour, this virtual book tour. What's the one question that you've been just itching for someone to ask you that no one's asked? I'm going to let you ask and answer your own question here to close things out.
The one thing I want to mention, I love that. I don't want to. I'll do this as fast as I can. The process behind this is so incredible, and I would love at some point just to talk about, how do you research? You can't Google rabbi guest chaplain and out comes a book. One of the great things that I've experienced was the congressional record going online during the course of the research year. The Library of Congress has put it online. And for anybody out there who wants to pursue a passion project, this is for me, you have to trust me on this. There's no money in writing a book about rabbis who pray in Congress. I know that might be a shocker to the people here, but this is a contribution. This is something I want to give to the American Jewish community as a gift, because it's a slice of history that I love talking about, that no one knows about. But the tools, to answer your question, the tools behind this are only new tools. The congressional record being online, I've put in a pitch where I work, C-SPAN, our video library allows you to search the archive video. This kind of story cannot have been put together 10 years ago without the modern tools being available. So it's great. It's wonderful to be able to see all this history come together in a brand new way.
Well, thank you for writing the book. I enjoyed reading it. The book is, when I'm doing this like I saw on talk shows here, the book is When Rabbis Bless Congress, published by Academic Studies. There we go, the copy there, Academic Studies Press. It's available at all of the usual places books are sold. Howard, thank you for being here. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for sharing this with us. To everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us. If you've got other questions, folks, you can figure out how to reach me. I will put you all in touch. And if you're calling in from another temple and you want Howard to come to do a virtual event for you, I'm sure that could be arranged. We will share him here in California. Thank you all very much. This has been so much fun. Until next time.
And thanks to Andy for putting this program together and emceeing our really fun and interesting evening.
You betcha, Kate. All right, everyone, take care.
Great program.
Hi there. Thank you.
Hi. Wonderful. We really enjoyed it.